Detective, if you could introduce yourself to the jury.
Good morning. My name is Lacey Ziniani, Juvenile Detective with Charlotte County Sheriff's Office.
Could you spell your name for the record?
Zenioniani.
And how long have you been employed in law enforcement?
I've been employed in law enforcement for 5 years.
Tell the jury about your training and experience.
My training and experience started on road patrol for my first 3 years, and I have currently been in this position for 2.
And the position you're in as a juvenile detective, what does that mean?
So my position focuses on juvenile intervention and working with the youth within our county. My unit focuses on working with juveniles who are at risk. I also monitor our juveniles who are on probation and try to lead them into a successful pathway, as well as working with our runaways and just any juvenile who is experiencing issues or trouble at home.
How did you come in contact with the defendant, Colin Griffith?
I came into contact with the defendant after the initial incident that occurred. It was forwarded to me for intervention purposes.
What were your goals then when you got involved in the defendant's life?
Our goals were to implement intervention and work with the family to assist them with resources and guide them to a successful pathway.
Would you have interaction with not only the defendant but also his mom, Kathy Griffith?
Yes.
Did you have any interaction with the defendant's grandmother, Susan Detman?
Yes.
And was that both in person and on the phone?
Yes.
Describe to the jury the accessibility part of your relationship to the mom and the defendant.
So I spoke with the mom and the defendant very often. My role was to be available to them, again, for resources, so we would sometimes speak daily, sometimes speak multiple times a day. Whenever they needed to call, I was there to answer and assist with whatever they needed.
On the day that Kathy Griffith died, did she contact you or try to contact you?
Yes, prior to she contacted me via phone.
And was that a text message or a phone call, do you recall?
It would have been both.
And you responded to her at some point that same day?
Yes.
Was she alive to answer that phone call?
Yes.
Did she answer that phone call?
Yes.
Towards the end of the day, did you ever call or text her and she didn't respond to you?
Yes.
All right. Now, can you give us kind of like a time frame, the general month and year to the general month and year of when you would have been in the defendant and his mom's life?
Roughly, we began intervention back in September of 23, and that would have ended September of 24, I believe.
Did the defendant ever make statements to you or in your presence that concern you about the violence he wanted to inflict upon his mom?
Yes.
And what do you remember him saying?
I don't recall specifics, but there were comments that if he returned home or back into the residence with his mom, that he wouldn't be able to control what had happened or that he would harm her.
When you say he wouldn't be able to control what would happen, do you mean how he would act?
Yes.
Did he say anything more than harm her? In terms of, did he say he would hurt her or kill her or anything specific?
There were comments that he would kill her.
And did he say to you or in your presence on more than one occasion that he would kill her?
Yes.
And did he make those statements that he would kill his mom on different dates?
Yes.
What type of time period do you think he made those statements in terms of how many days, weeks, or months of a time period did he repeatedly say he would kill his mom?
I don't know any specifics, but it was often that the comments were made.
The defendant made those statements often?
Yes.
And when he would make those statements, what would be your response?
We would just try to work through with him and mentor him about the opportunities that he had for his future and how to work through the situations at hand and the consequences that would result from those comments.
Did it appear that he would get angry when mom would try to take away his video games and cell phone and things of that nature?
Yes.
Was that a reoccurring source of discontent on the defendant's part?
Yes.
Now, besides providing help to Colin and attention to Colin Griffith, did you also provide that to his mom, Kathy Griffith?
Yes, we did.
Was she receptive to doing what you told her to do?
At the beginning, she would act like she was receptive, but would go against what was being discussed.
And would she basically give in to cater to the defendant's desires?
Yes.
Do you think she was being would give in too much and be too soft on him at times?
At times, yes.
Now, from those many months that you interacted with the family, was it clear to you that she loved Colin and wanted him to be around her?
Yes.
Did she understand the danger to her life having the defendant around her?
Yes.
Did she know that he had explicitly said he would kill her?
Yes, she made a comment to me that she was willing to accept her faith if that gave her more time with her son.
Meaning she was willing to die at the hands of the defendant as long as she had more time to spend with him?
Yes.
Now, getting to know the family a little bit, did you become aware that there were also good times between the defendant and his mom?
Yes, the family frequently went on vacations such as Disney cruises. They went on multiple cruises together and other family trips.
Were they able to tell you about going to the movies or having movie passes to be able to go to the movies together?
They thoroughly enjoyed going to the movies together.
Whatever flaws Kathy might have had, was she trying to be a good mom?
I believe at the time she was doing her best, yes.
From your observations over that many-month period, did the defendant have respect for his mom and her rules?
No.
All right, Detective, I don't have any further questions for you.
Cross.
Good morning.
Morning.
Detective Zanoniani, you talked a little bit about your role in the juvenile division. It's sort of a special role in the sheriff's office, isn't it?
Yes.
Because you're doing your best to intervene to help families make it through a difficult adolescent period often.
Yes.
And the resources that you provide, which is your job, right, is for both parents and the kids.
Yes.
So it's not limited to just the kids or just the parents.
Well, it mainly focuses on the juvenile itself, but taking it an extra step further to make sure the parents have what they need to follow through thoroughly, yes.
And sometimes problems that children appear to have are related to their parents or how they were parented.
Yes.
Is that fair? Obviously, you got to know Kathy and Colin Griffith pretty well here over the year that you were involved, right?
Yes.
Sorry, you need to answer out loud so the court reporter
Yes.
can take it down. Did you also get to know Susan Detman?
Yes.
And as part of your job in getting to know the family and the dynamics, because that's important too, right?
Yes.
You came to learn quite a bit about everyone's background, right?
Yes.
Okay, especially Kathy.
Yes.
And did you actually seek out information about Kathy's past in your efforts to provide resources to both her and to Colin?
In the beginning, yes.
So you became aware of some prior involvement that Kathy had with DCF, right?
Yes.
And it's fair to say that in most, if not all, of those prior DCF involvements, it involved Kathy being violent or aggressive towards other family members.
Yes.
And many of her actions that caused DCF to become involved were committed in front of her children.
Most of them that I recall, yes.
And in fact, her kids were taken away from her, were sheltered from her at times, correct?
I don't recall those specifics, but
Would it surprise you?
no.
And you're also aware that Kathy had been arrested before,
Yes.
specifically for an incident that involved her stabbing her then husband in front of 10-year-old Colin.
Yes.
And also, there were other incidences where Kathy committed violence upon her then husband in front of the children.
Yes.
So you're aware of the car pinning incident, which I call
Yes.
it, where she drives her car and pins her then husband to the house with her car still running. He can't escape, right?
Yes.
And her older son, Christopher, had to go and yell and beat on the car and tried to get a baseball bat to break through the windows to finally get his mom to release her then husband from
I don't recall those very specifics, but I do recall minor details of the report, yes.
And you're also aware that Kathy Griffith had, well, let me say it this way. The Charlotte County Sheriff's Office responded a lot to Kathy's home. Is that fair?
Yes.
And one of those times involved, didn't actually happen at her home, but she had threatened to kill her then ex-husband's girlfriend's family. Are you aware of that?
I don't recall specifics on those details.
Okay, so you don't recall Charlotte County Sheriff's deputy contacting her and getting her, trying to convince her to turn around from going to Homestead to kill the 3 members of the family?
I don't recall that, no.
What about an incident when Kathy claimed that someone had committed a crime upon her and called law enforcement? Are you aware of any of those instances?
Yes.
Okay. So, for example, you're aware that Kathy claimed that her then husband's paramour had strangled Kathy, and that she had video proof of this woman strangling her.
I believe I recall something similar, but again, I don't recall specific details on those.
But the takeaway from all that is that Kathy called police claiming that she had been strangled by someone else, but the video proof she had was clear that it was Kathy strangling herself. Do you remember that?
I don't recall that.
Would you say that Kathy, in your interactions with her, definitely wanted her things to go her way, or she was not going to have it?
Yes.
Okay. So sort of her way or the highway?
Yes.
It's also fair to say that she really, really, really wanted Colin to stay with her.
Yes.
She knew that Colin did not want to live with her, correct?
Yes.
She knew that he had said he didn't feel safe with her, right?
Yes.
And she still wanted him there at all costs.
Yes.
Even despite the things that you all told her he said.
Yes.
In your opinion, as somebody who provides intervention for families either in turmoil or distress, or if there's been an arrest, do you think it was a good idea for Colin and Kathy to live together?
We did everything we could as far as intervention purposes, working alongside of our mental health unit and with DCF, and that was the decision that was made.
Who made it?
DCF returned him back to his home. We had resources we could implement in the time being to help guide them. I can't speak on who made it specifically.
No, but your personal opinion?
I'm confident that we did everything we could. I don't know that I feel comfortable giving my
If it
personal
had been
opinion.
your decision, you would not have
Yes.
allowed them to live together, correct?
Correct.
For both of their safety?
Yes.
Including Colin's safety from what Kathy might do to him?
Both.
Yes. And sort of along that same vein, Kathy, in just the year that you knew her, was suicidal several times.
There were several suicide incidences, yes.
So when you say instances, it's not just her saying she's suicidal. She actually attempted suicide several times that you are personally aware of.
Yes.
So overdosing on oxycodone, for instance.
Yes.
Mixing it with alcohol.
Yes.
Are you aware of a time when she had a gun in her hand but had become so incoherent from the pills that she luckily didn't?
Yes.
She even posted things sometimes about wanting to kill herself. Are you aware of that?
I never had access and or viewed her social media accounts
Okay.
to answer that.
But safe to say that at times she really wanted to die
Yes.
and went beyond just saying it, but actually tried to.
Yes.
On September 11th or 12th of 2023, so right when you first became involved with Colin and Kathy, did you speak with Colin about why you had gotten involved? About why the sheriff's office was, talking to them?
Yes.
Okay. And he told you that time that his mom had pulled a gun on him, right?
Yes.
And that she had pointed at him and threatened to shoot him?
Yes.
Or herself, or both?
Yes.
And he gave you a lot of details about what all she said to him.
He gave a lot of details to the initial responding deputies who took the report, who would have had everything. I followed up the next day for intervention purposes, not mainly focusing on that, but figuring out how we can help them moving forward.
And what he said happened. is not unfathomable given Kathy's past, right?
No.
And you're aware that Kathy actually had a gun in her home at that time?
Based on the information of the initial call, it was assumed there was a gun in the home, but she denied it being in there. There was no way for us to prove if it was in the home or not.
But you found out later that there had been a gun in the home, right?
Several months later, yes.
Yeah. And so she lied to you about that?
Yes.
And she convinced everybody that she had never done such a thing, right?
Yes.
Are you aware that she actually admitted to her own mother that she had pulled a gun on Colin?
No.
When you first became involved with Colin and Kathy, Colin was in the Baker Act facility, right?
Yes.
And Kathy was not being cooperative with the efforts that everybody was making to make sure that she was safe, that Colin was safe, that things were being done to make sure nothing bad happened to either one of them,
Yes.
right? So, for instance, she wouldn't sign medical release forms for people to be able to communicate about Colin's treatment if any was needed.
That's correct.
And when the Charlotte Behavioral Health Center wanted her permission to try some different medications with Colin, she refused, right?
Yes.
And at that point, he was only 16, right?
Yes.
So she had to make those decisions for him.
Yes.
And in fact, she was so desperate to have Colin back with her, despite everything that happened, that she hired a lawyer to get him released from Charlotte Behavioral Health, right?
Yes.
And that actually happened.
Yes.
But Colin kept saying, I don't feel safe going home. I'm afraid of what she might do to me and then what I'll do in response.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. And then another time, I think it was part of that same episode, Colin actually got placed into a place called Sandy Pines.
Yes.
And what do you know about Sandy Pines?
Sandy Pines is a residential facility on the other coast. Usually your local mental health facility will complete a packet. Our mental health team would be able to answer this a little bit better than I can. But they go through a formal process and send them away to this residential facility to obtain help.
Okay. And your understanding of it is that it's a 60 to 90 day program?
Yes.
And that's designed to get the maximum benefit from
Yes.
it, correct? As opposed to, say, Charlotte Behavioral Health and Baker Act, which is usually just a few days to get someone past
Yes.
whatever acute problem they're having.
Correct.
Kathy checked Colin out of Sandy Pines after 3 days, right?
It was very quickly, yes.
And against medical advice, right?
Yes.
And against your advice.
Against all of our advice, yes.
Everyone's advice.
Yes.
All right, so you're checking in regularly with the family on November 12th of 2023, so the night that Colin was arrested for battering his mom. Well, actually, this is the day before. I apologize. There might have been some contact between either you or Corporal Rentis, who is somebody you work with in the juvenile division,
Yes.
right? Okay. Corporal Rentis was also very involved with Colin and Kathy,
Yes.
right? In fact, I think you may have told me on another occasion that you had a really close relationship with Kathy in terms of you communicated more often with her, but Colin and Corporal Rentis would communicate most often.
Yes.
So Colin would reach out to Corporal Rentis more often than he reached out to you.
Yes.
But he did reach out to you sometimes.
Yes.
Sorry, I thought I heard something. So on November 12th, so the day before he got arrested, did you have any communication with either Kathy or Colin when he called Rentis and said, I don't feel safe at my home anymore, my mom kicked me out, but now she's calling me a runaway, I don't feel safe with her because she had a gun and she's threatened me before?
I don't recall specifics of our phone call because, again, we spoke almost daily, if not every other day, but they would reach out when things would escalate so that we could try to guide them through the process.
Okay, but that particular, you do remember an incident shortly before Colin was arrested for domestic violence battery where his mom kicked him out.
Yes.
And he said then when she started calling him a runaway, he didn't feel safe going back home because of the gun incident, and law enforcement got involved that day as well.
Yes.
And nobody checked for a gun that day either, right?
I can't speak for who was there.
Okay. But you are aware that Colin actually went with Susan that night.
Yes.
To her house in, I think
Yes.
to her Auburndale house.
Yes.
Okay. And was the recommendation at that point for Colin to stay with Susan for some length of time, or was it kind of up in the air?
He had a good relationship with his grandma, so she was a good divider between the two to keep them separated. So we were just trying to keep them separate for a couple days until things de-escalated.
Are you aware that Kathy demanded that Susan bring Colin home immediately the next day?
Yes.
On the 13th. Yeah. And were you involved in any of the discussions about that?
I recall speaking with Catherine and advising her to let them stay separate for a couple of days.
That she insisted that Colin
Yes.
be brought back to her home?
Yes.
Are you also aware that she punished Colin for not coming home quickly enough?
I don't recall specific punishment other than taking his gaming equipment away, if that's what you're referring
What
to.
about corporal punishment? Are you aware of any corporal punishment she inflicted on him?
No.
Really? So not a belt whipping incident?
I don't recall a belt whipping incident.
And speaking of that, if Kathy claimed to Susan, who witnessed the belt whipping, that when Susan said, hey, don't do that, and Kathy said, no, it's okay, Rentis told me I could do it, would that be something you would expect Corporal
That's not
Rentis
something
to...
Corporal Rentes would say.
It's not something he would say?
No.
Okay, so if Kathy said that to Susan, she would have been making it up.
Yes.
Then on the 13th, we know Colin is arrested for the domestic violence battery. And he said that his mom had punched him, and in response to that he kneed her and threw her off of him.
Yes.
Yep. And given Kathy's history, that's not, once again, unfathomable, is it?
No.
On the 14th of November, so the day that Colin got released from the jail, you're aware that he told jail personnel, I don't want to go home with my mom. Please don't make me go home with my mom. I don't feel safe with my mom. I'm afraid of what she'll do to me and then what I'll do in response.
I wasn't there for that specific situation, so I can't really speak on their behalf.
Are you at least aware that it occurred?
Yeah.
And jail personnel made him go home with his mom.
At the time, again, I wasn't there, so I can't speak on that behalf of what happened there.
Well, Colin's at home with mom when Charlotte County Sheriff's deputies have to respond to the home because the jail, I think, realized maybe that wasn't such a good idea to make him go home with mom and asked them to go check. Were you a part of that?
No.
Going to check? Were you aware of it at any way?
Not at the time. Not at the exact time, no.
But you found out about it later?
Yes.
And you're aware that as soon as the sheriff's deputies get there, that Colin is doing standing marches right in front of Kathy, holding weights above his head.
I remember a comment being made about it, but again, I wasn't there during that specific time.
Did you ever speak with any of the deputies who responded to the house that day?
No.
No? Okay. At any rate, you're aware that Colin ended up being Baker-acted again on the 14th because he said, I'm afraid of what my mom will do to me if she comes at me, if she abuses me, if she attacks me, I will defend myself. I may hurt her. Okay. That same day, I know you're aware of this because you actually, I think, made the call. Kathy overdosed on medicine, right?
Yes.
Okay, so she ended up in a Baker Act facility on November 14th, 2023.
Yes.
Over the next few months, you're aware of the ups and downs between Kathy and Colin, right?
Yes.
And they went back and forth with who would be taking care of him, to the point where eventually Colin's lawyer, you know who Jeff Rapkin is, right?
Yes.
That was Colin's lawyer for the domestic violence battery.
Yes.
Actually, let me back up then. So on the domestic violence battery charge, it seems that Kathy was a little inconsistent in what she wanted to see happen with that charge. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
So sometimes she wanted the book thrown at him, take him away, lock him up, whatever. But then other times she wanted the charges dropped completely.
Yes.
Okay. And it wasn't always predictable what she would want.
Correct.
More suicide attempts throughout the next few months on Kathy's behalf, right? Mm-hmm. Yep, she got Baker-acted several times, overdosed more than once.
More than once, yes.
Okay. So during this time, Mr. Ratkin is representing Colin in the domestic violence battery case, and eventually Colin gets put on probation. But that's not until several months later, right?
Yes.
But in the meantime, as Kathy's not sure what she wants to happen, you're aware that both Kathy and Susan signed an agreement to have concurrent custody of Colin, right?
Yes.
And that's called the 751 plan?
Yes.
So both people who are taking on the responsibility or the duty of caring for a child have to sign in front of a notary for that to happen, right?
Yes.
And they have to file the paperwork with the court system.
Yes.
And then eventually a judge either agrees with it and signs an order or says, no, I don't agree with the concurrent custody.
Yes.
In this particular case, you're aware that a judge did sign off on the concurrent custody agreement.
Yes.
So that meant that both Susan and Kathy at any time could be caring for Colin, and it would be legal.
Yes.
They could each make medical decisions for him at any time
Yes.
and enroll him in school, things like
Yes.
that. And neither one needed the permission of the other to do any of those things.
Correct.
So DCF got involved again in February of 2024. You know what incident I'm talking about?
Can you specify?
Well, it's the time when they actually found a gun in the home, the gun that Kathy claimed wasn't there, and DCF got called out, and Kathy actually claimed that Colin had attacked her and battered her again. Does that incident sound familiar?
I don't recall very specifics. She may have told DCF that, or admitted to DCF at the time that she had a gun in the home, but I wasn't there, so I don't remember
Actually, I
specifics.
thought maybe you were there. Didn't you find a gun at her home one time?
After the fact, yes.
After what fact?
After working with him for a while, she admitted and willingly gave us the gun to hold into our evidence for everybody's safety.
And when was that?
I don't recall
Okay.
specifics.
But after she'd told you that she didn't have a gun in the home, you
Yes.
went and actually retrieved one?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And you have no idea if she bought another gun or had another gun or...
No, I mean, I can't speak on what she did.
Okay.
Behind closed doors.
So I'm talking about the incident where Kathy claimed that Colin had battered her. She called law enforcement and tried to get him arrested.
Okay.
And the deputies looked at ring video from the home and determined that that did not happen. Are you aware of that?
Briefly, yes.
Okay. And that DCF thought that Colin should stay with Susan or someone else for a while.
Yes.
That Kathy wouldn't allow it.
Correct.
Once again.
Correct.
Okay. Are you aware of any other times when Kathy made false allegations?
I mean, she made false allegations on multiple occasions, but unless you ask specifically, I don't recall.
Okay.
What are you referring
No,
to?
it's okay. I think you've given the jury a good idea of how trustworthy she was, which is not very, correct?
At times, no.
Would you say that she was erratic in your experience with her?
I would say she was very undecisive.
So erratic is not a word you'd use. Well, what about the kicking Colin out and then turning around and calling him a runaway because she'd kicked him out? That's pretty erratic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yes.
she did that more than once, right?
Yes.
Including when she knew she had kicked him out and he was with Susan.
Yes.
She'd
Yes.
call him a runaway and...
Yes.
Did you say she was unpredictable?
Yes.
How about manipulative?
Yes.
She manipulated you or tried to manipulate you and other law enforcement officers, right?
I believe they both were, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Fair enough. What about sort of self-sabotaging in terms of what she wanted and how to
Yes.
accomplish that? Yes?
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about Colin's probation terms. So far as you know, he was complying with his probation terms, right?
He was compliant with probation, yes.
And those probation terms also allowed him to go out of county to stay with Susan, right?
Yes.
Okay, there wasn't any requirement beyond that other than letting his probation officer know that he was going there, right?
Correct.
And his probation officer was Monique?
Yes.
In all the time that you dealt with Colin and Kathy, Colin basically told you he would rather be in jail than with his mom, right?
He made a comment.
What about that he'd rather stay in a psychiatric facility than go home with his mom?
There was a comment made previously, yes.
And he also has said he'd rather be in foster care than with his mom.
Yes.
Okay. And that's because he felt unsafe with her?
That is because he felt unsafe and they just did not get along. They
Right.
didn't agree or respect each other.
Okay. But let's talk specifically about these statements Mr. Levine asked you about him, threatening to cause harm to his mom. Every single time you heard one of those, it was always prefaced with, if she attacks me, or if she harms me, or if she comes at me,
Yes.
I will harm her.
Yes.
Okay. So, indicating that he would utilize self-defense if she attacked him.
Yes.
On September 8th of 2024, so the day that Kathy died, you were communicating, well, let's say on September 7th into the early morning of the 8th, you were communicating with both Colin and with Kathy, right?
I was spending time with my family during the day, so I did not have my phone until several hours after this had initially started.
But weren't you talking with Colin via text?
He had texted me the day before, but I didn't answer, nor did I have my phone.
Okay.
So everything was after the fact when I had called and checked in the
Okay.
next
I
day.
thought you said that you'd talked to Kathy on the phone sometime on the 8th.
I talked to her the day that it happened
Yeah.
prior to, but I
Right.
wasn't available the day it started leading up to it.
I'm sorry. So on the 8th, you actually did communicate with Kathy.
Yes.
And you told her that she should let Colin stay with Susan,
Yes.
which was perfectly acceptable both legally under the 751 plan and under his probation conditions.
Yes.
And she just wasn't having it, was she?
No.
She was going to make him come home.
She was going to do whatever she wanted to do at the time.
You told her there was no need to go up there herself.
I told her to just give it a couple of days and let everything de-escalate.
Okay, but she didn't listen, right?
Right.
Kathy made some claims via text, and maybe even to you, I don't know, on September 8th, like that Colin was a runaway. Did she ever claim that to you?
Yes.
But that wasn't true, was it?
No.
She also claimed that Colin had stolen his car,
Yes.
and that she was going to get him arrested for stealing the car.
Yes.
But that wasn't true either, was it?
No.
She made claims that she had sold the car. Are you aware of those claims?
Not specifics,
Okay.
but
I'll move on. What about that? She specifically made a claim that law enforcement, meaning your sheriff's office, had told her that if Colin was not back at her house by 10 a.m. on the 8th, that she could be arrested and that you all were going to get involved because Colin was a runaway, and it would have been 24 hours then.
I don't recall those specific details that she would get arrested.
Okay. So safe to say you never told her that if Colin wasn't at her house by 10 a.m. on Sunday, September 8th, she would be arrested?
No.
Okay.
No.
And that law enforcement gave her until 10 a.m. to get him back?
No, that's incorrect.
Had Kathy expressed suicidal thoughts to you in the days leading up to September 8th?
I don't recall suicidal thoughts leading up to the day. No.
Okay.
No.
One second. Detective Zanoniani, actually, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you. Redirect.
All right, detective, would you agree that supposed suicide attempts are often cries for help?
Yes.
It's pretty easy to commit suicide, would you agree? If someone's actually wants to do it?
Yes.
If you have a gun, you can put it to your head, pull the trigger, and suicide accomplished.
Yes.
All right, so Kathy had a gun. She could have killed herself anytime she wanted to, correct?
Yes.
But she didn't want to die, correct?
Correct.
She wanted to spend time with her son. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, there was some mention about some prior allegations between Kathy and the defendant's father, her ex-husband.
Yes.
And you were asked if you were aware of a bunch of different things. Were you aware that the defendant's father / Kathy's ex-husband was very abusive to Kathy?
Yes.
Were you aware that he impregnated her when she was a mere child?
Yes.
Were you aware that he was physically and mentally and emotionally abusive to her?
Yes.
And were you aware that there was some incident or some allegation where she did something with a corkscrew to him?
Yes.
Now, violence, of course, is not acceptable, but would you agree that Kathy was the relationship with her ex-husband and what she put up with at his hands was atrocious.
Yes.
So that probably certainly didn't help her being a child, being impregnated, and then, living however long she lived until she died, correct?
Correct.
So the defense described her as unpredictable. Is that correct?
Yes.
But what was predictable was her love for her son and her wanting her son to be with her, correct?
Yes.
And she was cognizant of the fact that probably as soon as he turned 18, he was going to say, see you later, and basically
Yes.
ignore her?
Yes.
It was mentioned that she was manipulative. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was the defendant manipulative?
Yes.
Who did the defendant show respect to?
His
What-
grandma.
Okay. And what set of people?
Of higher authority, people who had a lot of money.
Would he respect people that would do things for him or who could do things for him?
Yes.
Like buy him things and do things like that?
Yes.
And you said he loved his grandma.
Yes.
Do you know why he threatened to kill his grandma and threatened to do her harm in addition to loving her?
No.
Did you see many instances of when things were going according to the way he wanted them to go, he'd be happy and fine with it?
Yes.
Did you see many instances of when somebody tried to discipline him or take something away or tell him no, he would get furious
Yes.
and be immature and lash out?
Yes.
Is it a fair statement that he sure loved going on cruises with his mom?
Yes.
He sure loved going to Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia and the Caribbean and all these different places with his mom?
Yes.
He enjoyed vacations. He enjoyed the food, going out to eat. Is that correct?
Yes, they took a lot of vacations together.
He enjoyed basically unlimited Starbucks drinks, coffees, cold drinks, sandwiches that his mom would buy him.
Yes.
He loved the fact that his mom bought him computers, correct?
Yes.
He loved that she got him an Xbox.
Yes.
He loved that she got him a cell phone.
Yes.
He loved the video games and all that stuff, correct?
Yes.
But he didn't like chores, right?
Correct.
And he didn't like weed eating in the backyard or taking out the trash or keeping his room clean, correct?
Correct.
So God forbid he had to do any of those things. That would anger him, correct?
Yes.
So he would prefer to not have anyone telling him what to do. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sometimes our grandparents a little less disciplinarians than the actual parent of a child.
Yes.
And despite knowing that